The courtroom was supposed to be predictable that morning, another day of polished arguments and practiced lines. Yet as the crowd settled, an uneasy hum filled the air like static before a storm. All eyes flicked between the benches, the lawyers, the judge's seat, searching for the tension they already felt in their bones. Then, as if the room itself was holding its breath, Jasmine Crockett rose. Her voice, steady yet electric, broke the silence with a clarity that cut through marble and history alike. You will not erase the truth. You will not silence the people who built this country with their hands, their voices, and their sacrifice. The words didn't just land, they reverberated. Gasps echoed from the gallery, pens froze mid-scribble. Even the cameras seemed to pause on her. Judge Tanya Chutkan, known for her composure carved from years of legal battles, blinked in a rare moment of visible shock. She leaned back ever so slightly, her expression betraying that she too had been struck by the force of what she had just heard. In that instant, Crockett wasn't just an attorney, a representative or a woman standing at a podium. She was a vessel for centuries of unspoken rage and unwavering hope. Each syllable carried the rhythm of marches past, the weight of communities ignored, the defiance of people told to wait their turn. The so-called titan on the opposing side shifted uncomfortably, trying to mask the unease. But there was no mistaking it. The balance of power in that courtroom had shifted. Crockett had seized it, not with volume, not with fury, but with a precision that left no room for dismissal. Even those who disagreed with her sat motionless, caught in the spell of a truth too sharp to deny. It was more than a statement. It was an indictment, a warning, and a promise all at once. When her voice finally fell quiet, the silence that followed was heavier than any gavel. It was the kind of silence that signals the start of something irreversible, the kind that makes you wonder, what happens when the system designed to silence is forced to listen? But to understand why her words carried such weight, we have to rewind. To grasp the gravity of that moment, we have to understand what was truly on trial. It wasn't just a case buried in legal jargon or a dispute over procedure. It was bigger, far bigger. In that courtroom, the question wasn't merely about guilt or innocence, legality or technicality. It was about whether truth itself could stand against the machinery of arrogance and power. The walls of that chamber carried history, centuries of rulings, some noble, some shameful, all shaping the story of who gets heard and who gets silenced. On this day, the stakes weren't measured in dollars or contracts, but in dignity. They were measured in whether voices that had been ignored for generations could finally command the respect they were owed. The villain in this drama did not enter with fists or fire. No, the weapon of choice was arrogance, polished and smug. The opposition figure, draped in the confidence of privilege, had grown used to the microphone being theirs alone. Dismissive smirks, condescending tones, the casual certainty that no matter what evidence or passion came forward, the outcome would bend to their will. This was their fortress, and they believed themselves untouchable. But arrogance has a flaw. It underestimates the resolve of those who've had to fight for every inch. For months leading up to this hearing, dismissive voices had mocked the very idea that justice could prevail. They called it a spectacle. They called it a distraction. They claimed the fight wasn't worth having. And yet beneath the surface, millions watched, knowing that what played out here would ripple far beyond these marble walls. Every question raised in that courtroom touched something deeper. Would immigrants ever be treated as equals? Their sacrifices recognized instead of erased? Would working families ever see leaders who looked like them, spoke for them, refused to bow? Or would the same tired chorus of elitism continue to drown out the voices of ordinary people? Judge Tanya Chutkan, a figure of dignity herself, understood the weight of these questions. Her gavel was not just wood-striking sound. It was the heartbeat of a system straining under the weight of its contradictions. Her role was to maintain order. But order in this case meant more than civility. It meant ensuring that the truth was not buried under theatrics. And so, as the proceedings unfolded, the stakes sharpened with every exchange. For the villain, this was about maintaining dominance, projecting control, proving that nothing could pierce the armor of arrogance. For Crockett, it was about something more enduring, showing that dignity, when wielded with precision and courage, could not only pierce that armor but shatter it. The public knew it too. Social feeds buzzed with anticipation. Commentators speculated wildly. Supporters prayed this would be the moment where the tables turned. Critics sharpened their knives, ready to dismiss any misstep as weakness. The atmosphere wasn't just tense, it was suffocating, as if everyone inside and outside the courtroom was holding their breath, waiting to see whether history would bend toward justice or recoil back into silence. This wasn't a performance. It was a battle for the soul of representation, a reckoning for every sneer, every dismissal, every patronizing laugh. One side saw it as another day to reinforce hierarchy. The other side knew that every word spoken could light a fire in millions of hearts. And then, just as the tension reached its breaking point, the gavel struck. The sound reverberated through the room, sharp and final like a thunderclap before the storm. The moment the gavel struck, the tension in the room was unbearable, and that's when history began to unfold. To understand the drama of that day, you have to know the figure who sat opposite Jasmine Crockett, cloaked in the smug certainty of power. He was no stranger to the spotlight. In fact, he thrived on it. Cameras had long been his stage, microphones his weapon, and sneers his signature expression. This was a man who built his persona on dismissiveness, someone who treated every challenge as a nuisance, every opponent as beneath him. His record was littered with contradictions. One month he styled himself a champion of law and order, only to belittle the very courts when their rulings did not favor him. Another time he claimed to defend the ordinary American, yet his policies consistently bent toward those already seated comfortably at the table of privilege. His hypocrisy wasn't hidden, it was flaunted, as if daring anyone to hold him accountable. And time and again, no matter the scandal, no matter the lie, he emerged with the same grin, the same air of untouchability. In congressional hearings, he was notorious for rolling his eyes at female colleagues, interrupting them with a smirk or dismissing their expertise with a wave of his hand. To his supporters, this arrogance read as strength. To those who saw through it, it was nothing more than the brittle armor of insecurity. He embodied bluster, mistaking volume for authority, mistaking insult for argument. One moment in particular had burned into the public memory, a televised exchange where, instead of answering a direct question, he leaned back in his chair, chuckled, and said, "You wouldn't understand." That phrase, soaked in condescension, spread across social media as a rallying cry for those tired of being underestimated. Memes mocked him, critics skewered him, but he didn't flinch. He doubled down, reveling in the outrage. Because in his world, outrage wasn't a consequence, it was fuel. He carried that same energy into the courtroom. Sitting stiff-backed, jaw tight, he radiated disdain. Every time Crockett spoke, he scribbled something dismissively on his notepad, as though her words weren't worthy of response. Every glance at the judge was calculated, a silent assertion that he had the upper hand, that no matter the evidence, no matter the truth, power would bend in his direction. His history confirmed it. Time and again, rules had bent for him. Allies in high places offered cover, pundits spun his missteps into victories, and a loyal base treated his arrogance as defiance. To him, the system wasn't an impartial structure. It was a stage for his performance, one in which he always cast himself as the untouchable victor. Yet arrogance always leaves cracks. Beneath the practiced sneer there was fear that the facade could fracture, that someone armed with both dignity and clarity might cut through the theatrics. He masked it with bluster, with interruptions, with a performative swagger. But those who watched closely could see it. The tapping foot under the desk, the clenched jaw when confronted with inconvenient facts, the darting glance toward cameras to ensure the performance was still playing to his base. This was no mere opponent. He was the embodiment of every dismissive force that told people to wait their turn, every elitist who mocked accents, every leader who wielded authority not to serve, but to belittle. He wasn't just one man. He was the archetype of arrogance itself, a reminder of how power corrupts when it grows too comfortable, too insulated, too smug. And that's why the stakes were so high. If he left this courtroom unchallenged, it wouldn't just be another notch in his belt. It would send a signal to millions that dignity could still be silenced, that arrogance would forever win. He believed that outcome was inevitable. He had seen it play out before. He had watched opponents stumble under pressure, watched judges shrink from confrontation, watched the system bend in his favor again and again. As far as he was concerned, this day would be no different. But arrogance has a fatal flaw. It mistakes endurance for invincibility. It cannot imagine the quiet strength that builds in the shadows, the resilience that grows sharper every time it's underestimated. And as he leaned back in his chair, smirk, tugging at the corner of his lips, he could not see what was coming. He could not imagine that his old tricks, his rehearsed dismissals, his empty confidence, would soon collapse under the weight of a truth he never expected to hear. But arrogance always underestimates resilience, and that mistake was about to shatter the courtroom. Before the nation knew her name, before the headlines and the viral clips, Jasmine Crockett was a young woman who understood what it meant to fight with little more than determination in her pocket and fire in her chest. She was not born into power. She was born into struggle, into the quiet perseverance of communities that had long been overlooked. Her earliest memories were of family gatherings where stories of resilience were passed around like heirlooms. Elders spoke of working double shifts, of scraping together tuition money, of marching for rights that others took for granted. Those stories imprinted on her, not as distant tales but as instructions. They told her that survival was not enough. Dignity had to be claimed and justice had to be fought for. In school, she was the one who challenged unfair rules, who stood up when classmates were bullied, who questioned why some voices carried further than others. Teachers sometimes called her too outspoken, as though passion were a flaw. But for Jasmine, silence was never an option. Even then, she understood that silence was the tool of those who wanted the world to remain unchanged. Her path to law was not paved with connections or privilege. It was carved out of long nights of study, part-time jobs to pay the bills, and a relentless drive to use education as a weapon for those who had none. When she entered law school, she knew she was stepping into a world not built for her, but she also knew she belonged there. Every skeptical glance, every dismissive comment from peers or professors only sharpened her resolve. After graduation, while others chased lucrative careers in corporate offices, Jasmine chose a different road. She took on clients who couldn't afford fancy representation, people who had been chewed up and spit out by the very system that claimed to deliver justice. She walked into courtrooms where her opponents strutted with armies of resources, and she stood there with nothing but her preparation, her integrity, and her voice. And time after time, that was enough. Her reputation grew, not as someone who sought fame, but as someone who refused to back down. Colleagues described her as unshakable, opponents as a nightmare in cross-examination. To her clients, she was something more, hope. She wasn't just their lawyer. She was their advocate, their defender, their proof that someone in the system still cared. But her fight didn't stop at the courthouse. Jasmine understood that the issues her clients faced were symptoms of deeper injustice. That meant stepping into the political arena, a place where arrogance and corruption often ruled unchecked. She ran for office not because she craved a title, but because she knew voices like hers, voices forged in struggle, grounded in community, were too rare in those chambers. Her campaign wasn't polished, but it was real. She knocked on doors, listened to stories, shared her own. She spoke not of abstract policy, but of lived experience, of the immigrant families working 3 jobs, of the children caught in cycles of poverty, of the mothers burying sons too soon. And people responded not to rhetoric, but to authenticity. She won, not because she fit the mold, but because she broke it. In Congress, her presence was a disruption to the status quo. She refused to play the game of politeness when dignity was at stake. She didn't flinch under ridicule or condescension. She met it with facts, with fire, with the calm refusal to be diminished. Each hearing, each debate, each clash with arrogance only added to her legend. What set her apart was not just her defiance, it was her clarity. She knew exactly who she represented. The ones too often pushed aside, the ones told to wait their turn, the ones who were tired of seeing democracy become a performance for the privileged. She carried their voices into every room she entered, and when she spoke, it wasn't just for herself. It was for them. All the while she remained grounded. She returned home often, listening, learning, staying rooted in the very soil that had raised her. She never forgot the faces of those who first entrusted her with their hopes, and that kept her from drifting into the arrogance that consumed so many around her. Her power came not from ambition, but from connection. By the time she walked into that courtroom, Jasmine Crockett was more than a politician or an attorney. She was a symbol. Every sacrifice, every struggle, every sleepless night had prepared her for this. She had faced dismissiveness before, had stared down condescension, had been underestimated countless times, and each time she had risen stronger. Now, standing before Judge Chutkan, facing the sneers of arrogance once again, she carried with her the weight of every voice ever silenced, every truth ever ignored. She was not just speaking for herself. She was speaking for generations who had waited too long for someone to say what needed to be said. And when her voice finally echoed in that courtroom, it wasn't just her story being told. It was the story of millions. The silence after Crockett's opening words did not last long. The villain shifted in his seat, forcing a grin, the kind that masks unease with mockery. He cleared his throat and leaned into the microphone with exaggerated patience. "Representative," he began, his tone dripping condescension, "I think perhaps you've mistaken passion for substance. These proceedings aren't a theater for your sound bites." A ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom. The remark was calculated, an attempt to reduce her to spectacle, to strip her words of their gravity. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She stood motionless, eyes steady, as though the insult had sailed past her without ever landing. He pressed harder, mistaking her composure for weakness. "You see, when you've actually spent time dealing with real issues, when you've actually done the hard work, you realize that slogans don't solve problems. Law does, experience does, not fiery speeches meant to rile up the internet." This time he chuckled, a hollow laugh meant to draw others into his confidence. A few supporters in the gallery nodded, their smirks mirroring his own. But the room's attention wasn't on him. It was on her, waiting to see if her fire would burn out under the weight of arrogance. Jasmine finally moved, adjusting the papers before her with deliberate calm. When she spoke, her voice was measured, almost gentle. "You call it theater," she said. "But for the people who've been dismissed their entire lives, this isn't performance. It's survival. And survival, Congressman, has always had more substance than your polished dismissals." The air shifted again. Judge Chutkan tapped her gavel once, a subtle warning to maintain order, though her eyes betrayed interest. She too was caught in the pull of the exchange. The villain bristled. He leaned forward, his voice louder now, trying to reclaim the room. "Survival? Let's be serious. The law is not about feelings. It's about structure, discipline, tradition. And tradition is what you and your allies seem determined to tear apart." Crockett tilted her head as though weighing his words. Her expression was unreadable, neither anger nor disdain, but something more dangerous, patience. She let his words hang in the air, filling the silence until they sounded emptier than when he first spoke them. Then in that same calm tone she replied, "Tradition has never been sacred when it's built on exclusion. Discipline has never been justice when it silences the truth. If your definition of law requires people to disappear, then it's not law. It's oppression." The gallery erupted in a low gasp. Even those who had come expecting a routine sparring match knew they were witnessing something different. Every rebuttal she delivered was not just a response. It was a dismantling, piece by piece, of the arrogance across from her. The villain's face flushed. He tapped his pen furiously against the table, then snapped, "You think words will change reality? That's not how this works. Reality doesn't care about your rhetoric." Her eyes narrowed, her voice unwavering. "No," she said, "reality doesn't care about rhetoric. But people do. And people make law. People shape this nation. And when people speak with dignity, they change everything you think is untouchable." Another tap of the gavel. Judge Chutkan's voice rang out, "Order in the court." But her tone was not frustration. It was recognition of the intensity that now gripped the room. The villain leaned back, trying to reclaim his practiced ease, but the tension betrayed him. The smirk faltered. His voice cracked slightly as he muttered something about political grandstanding. His armor, once so impenetrable, was showing its first cracks. Crockett, however, remained unshaken. Every movement was controlled, every word sharpened like a blade. She wasn't rushing toward a conclusion. She was building, brick by brick, a case that would leave no escape, no dismissal strong enough to contain it. The clash was no longer an argument, it was a duel. One side threw insults like blunt weapons. The other wielded truth with surgical precision, and with each exchange it became clearer who held the room in the palm of their hand. Then came the moment no one in that room will ever forget. The air was electric, charged with the weight of every insult, every dismissal, every arrogant sneer that had been hurled her way. The villain leaned back, feigning calm, his smirk returning like a mask hastily reapplied. To him this was familiar ground. He provoked, he belittled, and eventually his opponents cracked under the pressure. That was the script he knew. That was the stage he believed he controlled. But Jasmine Crockett had not come to play her part in his performance. She had come to rewrite it. She let the silence stretch, her gaze locked on him, then slowly scanned the courtroom, meeting the eyes of those who had been holding their breath. And then, with a voice steady as steel and warm as fire, she began. You say this isn't about survival. That's where you've already lost the thread. Because survival has always been the story of America. Not the survival of arrogance, not the survival of privilege, but the survival of those who built this country with hands blistered from labor, with voices hoarse from protest, with dreams too stubborn to die. The words landed like hammer strikes. Gasps scattered through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens unable to keep pace with the cadence of her conviction. Judge Chutkan's brow lifted slightly, a flicker of astonishment breaking through her composure. Crockett didn't rush. She paused, letting the silence become part of the performance, allowing each phrase to echo against the marble walls before she continued. You hide behind tradition, she said, her tone sharpening. But tradition has been the excuse for every injustice in our history. Tradition defended slavery. Tradition silenced women. Tradition turned its back on immigrants who dug the foundations of our cities. And every time tradition was weaponized, it was people like you with power and arrogance who told the rest of us to wait our turn, to wait until we were convenient for you. The villain shifted in his seat. He adjusted his tie, shuffled his papers, anything to mask the unease that now radiated from him. His smirk faltered under the weight of a truth he could not interrupt. But we didn't wait, she pressed on. We marched. We organized, we voted. We stood in courtrooms like this one, demanding to be seen, demanding to be heard. And every inch of progress we've made has come not because the powerful granted it, but because the powerless refused to stop fighting for it. The gallery erupted in murmurs, the sound swelling like a rising tide. Judge Chutkan's gavel struck once, sharp and commanding. Order, she said. Yet her voice carried no reprimand toward Crockett. It was directed at the energy of a room struggling to contain itself. Crockett leaned forward now, her voice lower, intimate, forcing everyone to listen closer. You say reality doesn't care about rhetoric. But reality is built on words. Reality is shaped by the promises we keep, the lies we expose, the truths we finally dare to say out loud. Reality is this moment. Me standing here telling you that your time of dismissing us has come to an end. The villain opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His jaw tightened, his face flushed. His eyes darted toward the cameras, searching for reassurance, for the old confidence that usually came so easily. But the performance had slipped away. This was no longer his stage. Crockett rose to her full height, her presence filling the room. Her voice swelled, carrying both defiance and grace. For too long you've believed that arrogance is authority, that sneers are stronger than truth. But authority without justice is nothing more than tyranny. And sneers cannot survive when faced with dignity that refuses to bow. The room fell utterly silent. Even the hum of cameras seemed to fade, as though technology itself was holding its breath. She paused again, her eyes sweeping the room before delivering the line that would define the day. You may not respect me, but you will respect the people I represent. You will respect the families who built this nation, the immigrants who carried its promise, the women who refused to be silent, the communities who have bled for freedoms they were never fully granted. You will respect us not because you choose to, but because we will no longer allow anything less. The words hit like a thunderclap. The villain recoiled, his bravado collapsing under the weight of her defiance. He reached for his pen again, tapping it nervously. But the gesture betrayed the very thing he feared most, that the performance was over, and he had lost. The gallery could no longer contain itself. Applause erupted, shouts of agreement filled the air, the sound raw and unstoppable. Judge Chutkan slammed her gavel again, her voice rising above the roar. Order in the court. Yet behind her sternness there was a flicker of something else, something rare. Admiration. Crockett did not smile, did not bask in the reaction. She stood calmly, her breathing steady, her expression resolute. This was not theater for her. This was truth, and truth once spoken could not be undone. The villain sank back in his chair, his shoulders heavy, the color drained from his face. For the first time in memory, he looked small. Not because he had been insulted, but because he had been revealed. His armor of arrogance had cracked wide open, and there was nothing left to hide behind. And still, Crockett was not finished. She spoke once more, softer this time, but no less powerful. This courtroom doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the people. And today the people have spoken, through me, through every life that brought me here, through every sacrifice that made this moment possible. You cannot silence that. You cannot erase it. Not today. Not ever. The words hung in the air, suspended like a banner over history itself. Slowly the murmurs subsided, the gallery leaning forward, waiting, wondering if anything more could possibly be said. Judge Chutkan, still poised with her gavel in hand, exhaled slowly, as though she too had been swept into the storm and was only just returning to herself. The astonishment in her eyes was unmistakable. She had seen hundreds of cases, thousands of arguments, but rarely, if ever, had she seen a moment like this. And just when the courtroom thought the storm had passed, the real shockwave hit. The courtroom may have quieted, but outside those marble walls, the world was anything but silent. Within minutes of Jasmine Crockett's mic drop, phones buzzed like wildfire. Clips of her words spread at the speed of outrage and inspiration combined. A single snippet, her defiant declaration that authority without justice is nothing more than tyranny, was clipped, shared, subtitled, and reposted in dozens of languages before the court recessed. By nightfall, it had a name: Voice for Justice. On Twitter, the hashtag dominated the trending list, climbing past celebrity gossip and international headlines. Activists hailed her as the voice they had been waiting for. Students at universities streamed her speech in dorm rooms, playing it on repeat. One tweet summed up the collective mood with brutal simplicity. "This is what courage sounds like." It garnered millions of likes within hours. Instagram exploded with edits, pairing Crockett's words with protest footage, murals of immigrant workers, and archival images of marchers in Selma and Stonewall. TikTok stitched her speech into dances, slam poetry, and even comedic skits mocking the villain's stunned expression. Memes sprouted overnight, the arrogant smirk fading into shock, captioned with lines like, "When you realize you underestimated the wrong woman." But it wasn't just digital theatrics. Politicians who had sat on the sidelines felt the tremors. Progressive leaders tweeted support, calling Crockett's words a masterclass in truth-telling. Some moderates, sensing the tide of public energy, cautiously praised her as well, unwilling to appear out of step with a movement suddenly galvanized. Even a few conservatives, pressed in interviews, admitted grudging respect for her composure, though they quickly backpedaled with partisan talking points. Celebrities jumped in, amplifying the wave. Musicians dropped remixes with her most powerful lines layered over beats. Actors reposted clips with captions like, "Give this woman the mic every damn day." A viral video showed a group of schoolchildren reciting her words in unison, their small voices echoing the same defiance she had carried into the courtroom. It was more than performance. It was resonance, and the resonance was personal. Viewers didn't just watch. Many felt as if they were standing there beside her. Immigrant parents who had been dismissed and demeaned heard their struggles in her voice. Young women, tired of being told to wait their turn, saw themselves in her fire. Workers, long ignored by the powerful, felt a jolt of validation. Someone was finally naming the injustice they lived every day. In living rooms and coffee shops, conversations shifted. "Did you see her?" became the opening line to countless discussions. Families played her speech on TV, pausing to let grandparents explain how they had lived through earlier fights for dignity. In barbershops, salons, classrooms, and kitchens, Crockett's words became a touchstone, a reminder that justice is not granted but demanded. And for the villain? His undoing became part of the spectacle. Side-by-side edits of his sneers collapsing into stammering silence went viral. A cinematic villain finally stripped of his costume. His arrogance, once his shield, was now his meme, an image of power crumbling in real time. Yet beyond the headlines, beyond the viral clips and hashtags, there was something deeper. The impact wasn't only in how loudly her words spread, but in how quietly they settled into hearts. Communities long resigned to cynicism felt a flicker of possibility. It wasn't naive hope, it was recognition. Recognition that when truth is spoken with courage, it doesn't just echo in marble halls. It echoes in the lives of millions who refuse to be invisible. For a progressive generation hungry for validation, Crockett's courtroom stand wasn't just a performance. It was proof. Proof that defiance could be graceful, that resilience could be eloquent, that the powerless could stare down arrogance and not blink. Proof that identity was not a weakness to be mocked, but a wellspring of strength that could shake the foundations of power. And that proof carried forward, reshaping not just timelines and headlines, but the emotional landscape of a movement. But the true legacy of that day wasn't just in the headlines. It was in the lesson we carried forward. The courtroom may have quieted, but outside those marble walls the world was anything but silent. Within minutes of Jasmine Crockett's mic drop, phones buzzed like wildfire. Clips of her words spread at the speed of outrage and inspiration combined. A single snippet, her defiant declaration that authority without justice is nothing more than tyranny, was clipped, shared, subtitled, and reposted in dozens of languages before the court recessed. By nightfall it had a name: Voice for Justice. On Twitter, the hashtag dominated the trending list, climbing past celebrity gossip and international headlines. Activists hailed her as the voice they had been waiting for. Students at universities streamed her speech in dorm rooms, playing it on repeat. One tweet summed up the collective mood with brutal simplicity. "This is what courage sounds like." It garnered millions of likes within hours. Instagram exploded with edits, pairing Crockett's words with protest footage, murals of immigrant workers, and archival images of marchers in Selma and Stonewall. TikTok stitched her speech into dances, slam poetry, and even comedic skits mocking the villain's stunned expression. Memes sprouted overnight, the arrogant smirk fading into shock captioned with lines like, "When you realize you underestimated the wrong woman." But it wasn't just digital theatrics. Politicians who had sat on the sidelines felt the tremors. Progressive leaders tweeted support, calling Crockett's words a masterclass in truth-telling. Some moderates, sensing the tide of public energy, cautiously praised her as well, unwilling to appear out of step with a movement suddenly galvanized. Even a few conservatives pressed in interviews admitted grudging respect for her composure, though they quickly backpedaled with partisan talking points. Celebrities jumped in, amplifying the wave. Musicians dropped remixes with her most powerful lines layered over beats. Actors reposted clips with captions like, "Give this woman the mic every damn day." A viral video showed a group of school children reciting her words in unison, their small voices echoing the same defiance she had carried into the courtroom. It was more than performance. It was resonance, and the resonance was personal. Viewers didn't just watch. Many felt as if they were standing there beside her. Immigrant parents who had been dismissed and demeaned heard their struggles in her voice. Young women tired of being told to wait their turn saw themselves in her fire. Workers, long ignored by the powerful, felt a jolt of validation. Someone was finally naming the injustice they lived every day. In living rooms and coffee shops, conversations shifted. "Did you see her?" became the opening line to countless discussions. Families played her speech on TV, pausing to let grandparents explain how they had lived through earlier fights for dignity. In barbershops, salons, classrooms, and kitchens, Crockett's words became a touchstone, a reminder that justice is not granted but demanded. And for the villain, his undoing became part of the spectacle. Side-by-side edits of his sneers collapsing into stammering silence went viral. A cinematic villain finally stripped of his costume. His arrogance, once his shield, was now his meme, an image of power crumbling in real time. Yet beyond the headlines, beyond the viral clips and hashtags, there was something deeper. The impact wasn't only in how loudly her words spread, but in how quietly they settled into hearts. Communities long resigned to cynicism felt a flicker of possibility. It wasn't naive hope, it was recognition. Recognition that when truth is spoken with courage, it doesn't just echo in marble halls. It echoes in the lives of millions who refuse to be invisible. For a progressive generation hungry for validation, Crockett's courtroom stand wasn't just a performance, it was proof. Proof that defiance could be graceful, that resilience could be eloquent, that the powerless could stare down arrogance and not blink. Proof that identity was not a weakness to be mocked, but a wellspring of strength that could shake the foundations of power, and that proof carried forward, reshaping not just timelines and headlines, but the emotional landscape of a movement. But the true legacy of that day wasn't just in the headlines. It was in the lesson we carried forward. Judge Tanya Chutkan leaned forward, listening intently, as Jasmine Crockett's voice carried through the courtroom with unshakable resolve. It was a moment that stunned not just those in the room, but a nation watching from afar. The villain's arrogance, the smirks, and dismissals all crumbled under the weight of a truth too powerful to ignore. That is what this story has shown us. When dignity stands firm, arrogance always falls. Crockett's words were more than a rebuttal. They were a reminder. A reminder that justice does not whisper politely. It speaks boldly, that every insult hurled in contempt can be transformed into fuel for courage, and that when one woman chose to stand, millions felt themselves stand alongside her. This is why her voice mattered. Not because it embarrassed an opponent, but because it inspired a movement. It told every immigrant, every worker, every student, every dreamer, your story belongs here. Your dignity is not negotiable. Your justice cannot be delayed. And now it falls to us. If this moment moved you, if it made you feel proud, empowered, seen, don't let it pass in silence. Share it, spread it, carry it forward. Because stories like these aren't just about the courtroom, they're about all of us. So if you believe in voices like Jasmine Crockett's, voices that refuse to be silenced, subscribe, join our community, and be part of this movement. Every like, every share, every comment adds strength to the cause. Because when one voice rises, it gives strength to us all.